Okay, Natasha, this is our first time on these episodes having a guest and co-hosting and then with a guest. Are you ready, Natasha Alisa?
I know we're going just next level here. We're so professional, Sarah. I can't even.
I know. I was thinking, look, I say this every week, and then yesterday I got busy, so I didn't text you. But I'm like, okay, again, I cannot believe this is our 8th episode. Like, if you had told me a year ago, I would be doing a podcast with Natasha, of course, famously Kane's ex-wife, who I was friends with for years, and then we didn't. It's just amazing. So anyway, here we are. Here we are.
So
Um,
exciting. And I'm really excited for this one. This is the perfect first guest for us.
Me too, because so let's get to our guest. Dana Whitten is here. You guys may have seen her on my social media. I think Natasha's been sharing her. Dana is a super lawyer in Maryland, but she's licensed in DC, Maryland, Virginia. We're going to talk about that because a lot of you had questions about that. And she's a family law attorney. So what that means is, Dana, you handle divorces, child custody, alimony. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. And just for clarification purposes, I'm licensed in Maryland and Virginia and currently pending in DC. But I can accept clients in DC and represent them through my colleagues, can help kind of wave me in. So.
Okay, good, because that was like the first question from our listeners. Like Natasha and I, we'd solicited questions, and like everyone wanted to know if you can represent people in DC and Virginia too. So okay, pending DC. Okay, well, Dana, we put it out there. We got just tons of questions for you. And obviously, Natasha's going to jump in throughout this episode with her own personal experience because getting divorced is so tricky, and can go in so many different directions. So, in no particular order, we were just going to start. One of the big things that people wanted to know was overall in the DC region, how much does a divorce cost?
I thought this was a really interesting question because it unfortunately requires me to give the lawyerly answer of it depends. Do we have children? Do we have assets? Do we live in a leased apartment? Are there cars? Are there homes? Are there businesses? Are there retirement assets? So I can't exactly answer that question to the T. But what I can say is that if you and your spouse or you and your partner are able to reach an agreement prior to going to court, which I did a lot during COVID, people were ready to just, separate with as much, with the least amount of drama as possible. So if you are able to reach an agreement with your partner, spouse, fully signed, executed, you can get divorced in the state of Maryland in under a year. In Virginia, you still have to be separated for 6 months, but it can certainly streamline the process. And I would encourage everyone to try to resolve it because then if there's children involved, it's less, like I said, it's less dramatic. And there's a lot less hatred left on the table than there would be if you went to court.
I think what people were going for there is there, like, in your world, is there a national average? Like, I mean, is the average divorce cost like usually $10,000 by the time you retain your attorney, you're calling your attorney? Is there like a number that's out there?
Again, I'm sorry, and I hate to say it does depend. I would say upwards of $10,000. I could confidently say that.
Yeah. I think people were wanting to know that because they're saving to get divorced. So they want to know, like, okay, what's my app? What do I need to save for?
And,
Right.
and so much of it, like she was saying, of what you can do yourself is as least contentious as it can be between the two of you, the more money you will save from having done it both ways. One that was insanely expensive and one that, we did 99% of it ourselves. The reason it got so expensive with Peter was we had lawyers on every single email, every little issue that came up. You didn't send the girl's uniform that I paid for. That was, 30 minutes billable hours from the attorney, and you pay by the hour. When you pay an attorney, you put down a retainer and then you're charged by an hourly fee. So the least you can keep your fighting out of the divorce process, the more money in your pocketbook.
Dana,
I absolutely agree.
I'm curious about this, kind of like Natasha with you, with what you went through with Kane, right? And we know it was like, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And obviously Kane was making, great money in radio at that time. Dana, what happens? Because this was kind of a question what happens when you're like one person is the breadwinner? So, like, obviously, Peter, had all this money. I mean, does he have to pay for the attorney fees? What if I'm getting divorced? Dan has all the money, like that must have been so hard, Natasha, right? Like you knew you only had a certain amount of money, or was Peter paying for both sets of attorneys? Like, how does that generally work?
I would love to know Dana's advice about this because, I was a stay-at-home mom. And like you said, he was the massive breadwinner. And when we separated, I was totally on my own to come up with a retainer to put down, which I had to, beg my parents to help me with because I didn't have $20,000 sitting around to put down a retainer for an attorney. And then later on, I kind of wish my attorneys had done a better job, but we asked the court for him to pay, some of my attorney's fees. But there's a reason I left that marriage pretty much broke, and that's because it all went to lawyers. So I would love to know Dana's advice about if there's a better way to handle that if you are not if you don't have the salary coming in like your spouse.
Yeah, that's probably the toughest part when you're the dependent spouse, is being able to afford attorneys. There's some attorneys that, and I'm one of them, depending on the situation, that can put you on kind of a payment plan. But that ultimately, with the idea that you would ask the court for a contribution to, or payment of your attorney's fees. And I don't know what happened in Natasha's case specifically, but usually that is awarded. And that can help alleviate the financial constraints for the dependent spouse.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And Nat, I don't know like how much you can share, but did they eventually award you
Oh yeah,
like money
I mean,
you had to pay?
I don't mind sharing this at all. It's ridiculous, but my case was the extreme, but he ran me up so much legal debt that by the time we finally divorced, which took 4 years for us to even divorce because it was just so much back and forth, I had about $350,000 in lawyer's fees. And
On your side.
on just
That was
my side, that was just mine. And I believe, now granted, this was a while ago, but the court ordered him to pay 60 grand of it. So I was left with like the rest, which I could never possibly pay off. My attorneys put me on some sort of payment plan, but it was, drops in a bucket. So when we, the big mansion in Potomac that you were so jealous of, when we finally sold it, my half of it went straight to the attorneys. I didn't get a penny from the sale of that house. And it still didn't even cover, all my legal debt.
A lot of times that happens is post-divorce. The dependent spouse is forced to, use some of the funds that they received after their divorce from their spouse, but, from a sale of a home or sale of a business, in order to pay legal fees. I can tell you I've never seen $350,000 in legal fees. But that's
it's insane, right?
Astronomical. It is astronomical.
I always wonder because those were the attorneys that I used the first time, which I really feel like I didn't get the best advice and service from. And this was just my situation and me speculating, but I kind of feel like they knew how much money he was making and saw dollar signs and didn't do anything to help stop the billable hours from continuing to rake up. Every time his attorney wanted to put a crappy motion out there that had no merit whatsoever, I can now see in hindsight, they were happy to, want to go to court over it or go back and forth. And in hindsight, I see like we could have just said, no, screw you. Like, go ahead, take that to court. No judge is going to hold any weight to that. Like, it was stupid stuff. Like, you want to take me to court over Halloween, like stupid, baseless motions. But I think they just saw dollar signs and were hopeful that the judge was going to award a heck of a lot more money in attorney's fees for Peter to pay my attorney's fees. And it didn't end up happening.
I'm sure it's probably hard for you to comment like on that, Dana, because obviously like you didn't know their case, but I don't know. I mean, do you, Dana, look, you work with all kinds of different attorneys. I mean, do you, I would hope, right, that most attorneys, they take an oath that they're trying to do it in an ethical way and not saying like, oh, we got a rich client here, so let's just rack up the money. But I mean, obviously at the same time, there are attorneys that are shitty. So I guess it's hard to say, right?
Dana, I would love to know from Dana what you would do. What do you do in a situation? Because I know a lot of my followers have very narcissistic, contentious exes that use the court system to get at them because it's the only way they can try and control them anymore. What do you do when you're representing a woman to, is there anything you can do to kind of put your foot down and protect her from the other person abusing the family law system to try and just, attack her?
Yes, I had that case, a case similar to that, that we had a 4-day trial on in earlier this year. And so she and I reached an agreement that if any motion was filed, that she didn't want to see it until she had my response, or so that she could read them together, or a resolution of whatever motion was filed. So that's kind of how I was able to insulate her from feeling more like he was in control of the situation, because she had originally told me that when she would read what his attorney filed, without my response, it was a trigger for her, and it, freaked her out. It made her upset all over again. And so in order for us to move forward and for me to be sensitive to her feelings, that's what we did. And she was comfortable with that. And she was grateful that that's how we handled it. So that was, because a lot of the motions that the husband filed got denied. So it wasn't kind of like what Natasha said. There wasn't necessarily a lot of merit to it. It was more, in my opinion, I think, like, to bully her. So when she felt a lot better, like I said, when they would file something and I would provide, it takes me time to draft a response, but I would give her both together so that she could have the full understanding of what the issues are, with respect to whatever motion he's filed.
Oh, I love that. Because, like, Sarah, you and I talk about boundaries all the time and how to set healthy boundaries with your ex. She basically used you to set a boundary to protect her emotional well-being, that she didn't have to see, all of that. Because it's so triggering. It is so triggering every time you get an email from the attorney and you see what the other attorney is saying, because they can spout off all the nastiness they want about you. And it absolutely made me crazy. So I love that you came up with that and were able to protect her from having to read it until she absolutely had to read it.
Right. But she would always tell me, every time, even when I did give her the response, because they came into like PDFs, for example, like his motion is one PDF, my response is in another PDF, and she would tell me, she's like, I read his and I was, triggered again and unhappy, and then I read what you wrote and I feel so much better, and I think it's going to be, fine, or whatever. So that's how I was able to handle her, and I know she appreciated it, and so yeah.
Dana, we had a question from a listener about prenups. Obviously you handle when relationships do not work. What's your take on prenups? Should everybody sign one? This listener said, I have $50,000 in a retirement. That's all I have. But I'm wondering, should I have my future spouse sign a prenup? And when I do interviews like this and I hear you, I'm like, I need to post up with Dan ASAP. I need because it's like, it always starts out great, but then it if it does go south, it just seems like for the most part, it really goes south. So give us, obviously you see the worst, but what's your take on a prenup? And even if you don't have that much in assets, should you sign one?
Okay, so this is another it depends answer. I guess with the listener who has $50,000 in assets, because they own that prior to the marriage, that money will always be theirs. That'll be their separate non-marital, what we call, money. or retirement dollars or retirement assets, whatever it is. So you don't, by operation of law, their spouse will never be able to get their funds, absent a couple of things. But I would say if it's your first marriage and you're in your 30s or under, you probably don't have a lot of assets. So I would say that you don't need one. If it's your second marriage and you're probably over 30, and there's children involved, maybe from your first marriage, that I would suggest that would be when a premarital agreement would make the most sense. Or if there's like a family business, that would be an exception to what I just said. If there's a family business, or if there's a business involved, I would suggest having one. But I would say, as a general rule, if you're first marriage, 30 and under, I don't think you need one. And because then the issue of, well, do I waive alimony now, or do I come up with a number now for alimony, if and when we get divorced? And so I just wouldn't want somebody to cut themselves short. But so I think if it's your first marriage, I think you should, go all in, absent like significant family assets and businesses, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, that's good advice. Okay. I would have thought, I would have thought you would have said, like, if you're 18, like, sign that damn prenup. Like, you're not getting my Ford Focus, like that's like I'm keeping
the thing is, you probably own the Ford Focus already. So by operation of law, it's yours.
Well, let me ask you this.
Before the marriage.
Yeah, how does that?
Okay. If anything that you had before you came into the marriage is your own property and you don't need a prenup to protect that if you divorce in the future, then why have a prenup at all? If what you come into the marriage with is secured as yours without one, if that made sense.
Again, that's why I said it should really be, in my opinion, for second time marriages, when there's children involved, to just kind of protect your assets. And maybe you would have, I don't know, there can be an issue of commingling and using funds from a previous, that you had, from your first marriage or whatever, and then you use it to buy a house with your second spouse. That's when you kind of run into some issues. That's where I've seen prenuptial agreements come into play, to say, look, this is my money that I'm putting towards this house. I guess I'm generalizing, because
sure,
people over the age of 30 on their second marriages probably have accumulated more assets to buy more assets in their second marriage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
There's more commingling of funds, as opposed to just being a single person up through the age of like 35 and just living your life. And you have your 401k and you have your Ford Focus and you have your condo and all of that. But if it's a first time marriage, in my opinion, I think that you should go all in.
And does that go for, like, okay, if you're 25 and you've bought a condo and then you get married, but you came to the marriage with the condo, but let's say you end up putting your spouse's name on the deed. Aren't they entitled to that then? Or no, because you bought it prior and you can prove that it's yours, even if their name's on it?
That's correct. So, yes, that's right. So that's why you would need just documented proof that, how you bought it, the funds that you used, to buy it, the original title, but just simply adding their name to a house or a condo that you already own does not automatically convert the property to marital property.
That's
Okay, wow.
interesting. I never would have guessed that. I would have thought once you're on the title, then you own half.
It can be. I guess, again, it kind of depends, but
well, yeah.
if you can prove it, then you're in the clear.
All right, we have a lot of questions to get through from listeners. They were very into this topic. I think we kind of covered this, but I just wanted to circle back. One woman wrote, I'm a stay-at-home mom. Will it impact me having child custody due to no income? How is alimony and child support determined? What factors are considered? So I'm sure, everybody's case is different, but is there kind of a starting roadmap?
Yes, I thought this was a very good question. It's very important for everyone to understand that just because you're a stay-at-home mom and just because you don't have any income at present does not impact your ability to be a good parent. They are not tied. The judge will not say to you, you don't have a job, you can't have custody. Unfortunately, I have heard men say that to their spouses, that you don't have a job, what judge would give you custody of our children? You have nothing in your name, and it's more of a gaslighting, bullying tactic. So it's just really important for the female listeners in particular to understand that income and your ability to parent are not one and the same. So with respect to the second part of the question, which is how is custody determined? In Maryland, there are a number of factors. In Virginia, there's similar factors. In DC, they also have custody factors, is what it's called. So I would suggest wherever you live to type in DC, Maryland, Virginia, and then the word custody factors. And it should pull up a number of statutes, the law, and they just list them. And it's what the judge, for purposes of custody, with what the judge must consider when awarding custody. And so at the end of the day, the custody factors are supposed to lead the judge to the answer, which is what custody schedule is in the best interest of the children. So that is how they reach that answer, by weighing these factors. And then what was the other question about alimony?
Yeah.
Same thing with alimony. So there's a number of factors in every state that are very similar across DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And the judge is supposed to, by law, go through each of the factors and kind of explain their thought process. But in my humble opinion, I really think alimony comes down to, practically speaking, one spouse's ability to pay and what is the needs, the financial needs of the person receiving the alimony. Like, what can, if we're using a husband and a wife, what can the husband afford to pay while still supporting himself? Now, I had mentioned, Sarah and I talked about this, in Virginia, the cause of the demise of the marriage will be taken into account. I would say in Maryland, not so much, and DC, not so much.
Which basically means cheating.
Cheating, correct, yeah.
Cheating, right? If in Virginia, if your significant other cheats on you, they are not going to get any alimony. That's sort of the law there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I need to move to Virginia to make sure my husband won't cheat on me, because he'll get penalized. Noted.
One couple wrote in, they're a same-sex couple getting divorced in Charles County, Maryland. They wanted to know, as a same-sex couple, is there something they should be asking about or anything different for them with same-sex couples when it comes to divorce?
I read that, and that broke my heart. No, same-sex couples are absolutely treated as the same as heterosexual couples, and just like they have the right to get married, they also have the right to be divorced. There's case law. So this specific listener was asking about a county in Maryland, and there is case law that in Maryland that particularly protects same-sex couples when getting divorced and when getting custody. So they should be, luckily, we live in the DMV, which is a very progressive area. So I can't speak to other states. But I find that, we're in a progressive area and everyone is treated the same. And if they're not, then we've got a bigger issue on our hands.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great to know. All right. So, Dana, we had this question about a woman being the breadwinner. You know, oftentimes you see it other way around, but this woman wrote and she says, I'm the breadwinner. I'm getting divorced, been with my husband for 9 years, and we live in DC. I'm a nurse. I don't think he's going to ask for money, but my friends say I need to be prepared for him to turn nasty. How can I plan and be prepared that things might go south without pissing him off?
Okay, so that's a very good question. A lot of times what I tell my clients is to just blame me. So I do think she should get an attorney so she can talk about her options, so she can talk about what the finances in the family look like between her versus him. But in terms of not pissing him off, I really just encourage my clients to say, it's not me, it's my lawyer. And that really seems to work. And I have no problem throwing myself under the bus. And so that really seems to work in terms of toning anger down from the other side. And that makes my clients feel safe, that they can just blame it on me. So that's what I encourage them to do.
I'm
It's so
curious
gosh.
too, like, because that makes total sense, and I love that. But I'm curious what your advice would be if kind of it's a little reverse, because I've gotten a few emails with women saying that the husband is the one who, they're getting separated, they've decided to separate, children are involved, and he's saying, we don't need to get lawyers involved, I'm gonna figure out how much money you need and I'm gonna take care of it. And, I want to just like yell through the screen, like, no, don't be an idiot, that you, as much as you want to trust him, because this is somebody that you were married to and you obviously loved, you need to protect yourself. So, what's your advice for people that are separating, for the woman, if, he's kind of saying, we don't need to get lawyers involved, we can just do this on our own?
So I've had this situation before, and usually I operate kind of behind the scenes. You don't have to tell your spouse everything, especially if you're going through a separation. And you certainly should run things by an attorney before you sign anything. And so I have helped, like I said, people behind the scenes, and I'm able to give them maybe a different perspective than what the husband is willing to provide for. I might say we could do better in court, or I don't think this is enough, and I think that this is what you should say back. I've certainly helped clients write email correspondences, when this situation has occurred. But so I would highly suggest at least retaining an attorney for purposes of just getting a different perspective, and a legal perspective. And also, I can't stress this enough, I've had clients come in and they've signed an agreement because they promised that their husband would give them this, it would be this way, and it's not this way, and they spend more money trying to fix what they signed than they would have spent if they had just contacted an attorney to begin with.
That's such good advice. Well, let me ask you, I don't know if this is an ethical or legal question, but do you have to tell your husband or your significant other that you're getting this advice from a lawyer, that you've retained in a lawyer and you're running it past them? Or can they kind of just pay to get the advice from you and then, run it off as their own?
So my duty is to my client. So in this situation, my duty would be to the wife to make sure that I am, abiding by my ethical standards with her. With respect to her husband, who would be an opposing party, the same standards do not apply. So no, the wife does not need to tell her husband or spouse that she's consulting with an attorney. And like I said, I've done it before. There's nothing wrong with that, because you want to be able to protect yourself as best as possible. Because like I said, you can spend more money trying to clean up a mess than you would have if you had just done it the right way through counsel to begin with, or at least having some kind of legal advice.
I think that's just brilliant, because Sarah, I couldn't tell you, because, we get all these messages all the time, how many messages I get from women that are wanting to separate. And, they're scared to actually talk to an attorney. I mean, one woman that I was having this conversation with, she was worried that if she spoke to an attorney first, then the divorce could be, a judge would see it as her fault, and she could end up losing more custody of her kids or something because she initiated the divorce by talking to an attorney. Is that true?
Wow.
No,
Okay, good.
no.
Because I told her no,
So,
but now I'm like, is that true?
no, I have never heard a judge care who filed first, who met with the lawyer first, when you met with the lawyer, how many times you met with the lawyer. I mean, that comes ultimately down to attorney's fees and, you know, who should contribute what to attorney's fees if one spouse has more assets to pay the other's attorney's fees. But no, a judge does not care who files first in family court because you know the divorce is over, and that's why you're in court. So I've never had anybody be asked, you know, you know, the divorce is all your fault because you filed first or because you sought legal counsel first. If anything, a judge would prefer you to have a lawyer so that you're not showing up in their courtroom without counsel and trying to represent yourself and kind of not having a, you know, a case to put on. Instead, you're pro se is what that's called. You represent yourself without an attorney, which can be very difficult. So a judge would prefer you to have counsel so that everyone is speaking the same language, if that makes sense. The judge and then your attorney, and then I can explain it to my client.
Dana, I'm curious based on Natasha's situation, right? Is there something you should like, how do you find a good attorney that's going to be a good fit for you? I mean, you know, because you're really in the driver's seat. It's your money, you know, that you're going to be giving this lawyer. I mean, but are there certain questions or you know, is there something that kind of like, okay, you're a super lawyer, right? I mean, and you obviously have great accolades. What can people look for in an attorney that might say to them, this person really is a good fit for me?
I think this would be a good question for Natasha to answer, but I think from what I've seen from my clients is comfortability. And, you know, I was able to figure out with my client who was triggered by her ex-husband's kind of behavior. We were able to reach an agreement, she and I, about what I would be letting her know about, you know, when it was happening, so that, it, you know, she could not be upset by all of it. But it really just comes down to who makes you feel comfortable, who you think will represent your best interests at court. But maybe Natasha can give a perspective on that as well.
No, I think that's a fabulous answer. And, you know, I was thinking in my head about if, God forbid, I had to do this again. If I had to do it again, like a third time, I'm just moving to a nunnery and giving up on life. But if I, God forbid, had to do it again, you know, one thing that I was wondering, because I hear from a lot of people, it seems to me, let me phrase it this way. There's kind of two types of attorneys, at least in my experience. There's like the bulldog, super aggressive, you know, like alpha type of attorney that it's all about litigation. It's all about, you know, just punishing the other person and just going, you know, like balls to the wall. And then there's other type of attorneys, which are the types that I've tend to sought out more, that you can more sit down and have a conversation about, here's what's important to me. It's really important to me that I have 60% custody of my kids and this much amount of money to go on, or the house is really important to me. And what's your kind of creative way to get that done with the least amount of money possible? And I mean, you kind of strike me as that type of attorney more than the other kind. But what do you do when every time that, you know, Peter went through a couple different attorneys and everyone he hired was that just like asshole bulldog type attorney that was all about just obliterating me and everything's about litigation, going to court. I don't want to be that type of person. And I think a lot of women maybe can relate to that they don't want it to be like that. But what do you do when your spouse is hiring that kind of attorney?
That's a great question. I think that probably in my experience, attorneys act the way or behave kind of the way that their clients want them to behave. Right. So it sounds like Peter wanted to drag you through the mud.
Yeah.
And so his lawyers were willing to be an extension of him for that. So in order to combat that, you need an attorney who is capable of doing both, which is dealing with difficult attorneys, but also, you know, being able to make you feel comfortable, make you feel like your best interests are being put first. And so, like I had said earlier, with my particular client who had been very emotionally abused by her spouse, her husband did hire a difficult attorney, but we were able to overcome that in terms of her fears, and I ultimately got her divorced, which is what she wanted the most. And you know, so you need to find an attorney that you feel, like I said, comfortable, but also can you know, fight for you as well.
So maybe part of what you could ask when you go in for, because first, you know, you want a consultation with an attorney. You don't just, you know, pick one out of the phone book and hire them. You can pay just for a consultation, an hour's worth of time to sit down with them. Maybe, and I hadn't thought of this before, but it's a good idea not just to talk about what you want in the divorce, but also what type of opponent you're up against, you know, like who your ex is. And because like you said, then their attorney's probably going to be an extension of them. And you can ask, like, what would you know, like how you just explained, what's your game plan going to be to protect me, but also, you know, help me in this fight against a certain type of ex. It's a good
And
question to ask anyone.
usually when I have clients that feel like they're going to be bullied in court, that comes up in our first conversation. So that is a very important thing to try to identify for the attorney. You know, going into it, at least when you have the initial consultation, you know, I think my husband's going to be really difficult, or my spouse is going to be really difficult. You know, you should know that up front. You know, he's going scorched earth tactic. You know, are you capable of handling that kind of litigation?
Which
That
I'm
is,
sure you are.
yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean,
You've been in the
if I ever
business.
have to do it again, I know who to go to. Well, let me ask you this, because this was one thing that I hear a lot from women, and in my own personal situation I experienced, and I honestly don't know the answer to. So after Peter and I were already divorced, you know, it never ended with him wanting to take me back to court, and he, you know, filing a motion that he wanted custody changed, or, you know, different things in our divorce agreement. He was always saying I had violated the agreement, and he was going to hold me in contempt of court. And his attorneys, no matter how frivolous it was, were happy to take his money and be an extension of him. What can you do after, like, your divorce is done to protect yourself from having the family law system be a way that your ex just still abuses you? Because you can't spend money for eternity on lawyers. So what can you do when your ex is using, you know, an attorney to bully you?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I haven't had any experience like what you've described. Usually by the end of it, the abusing spouse is over it. Maybe it's because they've found someone else, or I don't know what, but I would say, and this goes to gaslighting tactics. I had a client who would email herself, just so that it was, and I thought this was so smart. She would email herself about incidents that had happened. And this was not post-divorce. This was, you know, but the same could apply post-divorce. But she would email situations to herself about what was said, what happened, and she followed up with kind of photos. So by the time she hired me, she had a whole binder of, you know, notes to herself, photographs of what had happened. And it was, she saved herself a lot of money because all I had to do was read the emails. I didn't have to get the information from her. And she kind of built her case for herself. And so that's what I would say is, I mean, and so emailing yourself also is a way that your ex, if you're still married or, you know, post judgment, whatever, it's not like a physical journal where somebody can find it and burn it or whatever. And so I always thought that was so smart that she emailed herself so that it was always like in the cloud kind of, you know, and so she could look back on those things and just remember what had happened to her, and also just let me know as her counsel what her relationship was like. So document everything. That's what I would say in terms of best protecting yourself.
I
God,
like
that's good
that.
advice.
Yeah. Because I get
Natasha,
that a lot, and I always say, like, document everything, all the little ways that he's, you know, trying to get at you every day. But I never thought about emailing it to myself. That way it's time stamped. And, you know, there's a digital footprint of when it happened and attaching the photos right when you're doing it. Brilliant. That's such good advice. What
I
were
was
you
going to
gonna
ask you, Natasha, if you did that with your divorce with Kate, like, you know, once you figured out it was really going to lead to separation, like, had you had a trail or any, I mean, because obviously we know Kane was a rare breed, who was keeping records on everybody, not just Natasha, but, you know, notorious for recording everyone. Did you ever did you start to do that? It's so hard.
I didn't do it before we were separated, but after or before we were divorced, like when we separated, I wish I would have, because the problem with not doing it is then by the time you are getting ready to go to court, it was just my word against his about all the little instances that had happened. Not to mention you forget, you know, of the little things that happen. But I did start, actually, it's kind of really sad. I found the journal the other day that I was starting to keep. Once he was starting to go downhill, you know, I told the story about how the girls were taken away the second time when they absolutely should not have been. And I was trying to get them back. And that's when I started noticing his behavior, because his addiction was really getting out of control. And I started just writing it down, because there was something every visit with the girls. Every visit, there would be something that they had told me or something that he would do. So I just started writing it, but I was only handwriting it down just with like a date and a note. It would have been much smarter to email it to myself, because I always wondered if this ever does go to court, like, yes, I'm going to have all this documentation for my attorney so I don't forget anything, but is this admissible? Like, is a journal admissible?
So it is, because it also helped my client, and it would have helped you. If you can't remember something, I could show you the email or your journal that you've written to yourself to refresh your recollection, so that you can talk about the incident. The actual document itself is not admissible in court, but that's neither here nor there. But it would at least help you remember, you know, jog your memory as to what you know happened surrounding the incident that you had documented, and so that can just help with your testimony and your narrative and the story of you know your marriage and your relationship.
Dana, how often, I mean, Natasha's case is so extreme, right? With Kane, like what she had to endure for so long. And those of us who know Kane know that that was absolutely true. But I'm curious, like the second time when Kane tried to take her girls away and, you know, had some success with accusing her of relapsing, which wasn't true. How often do spouses paint a false narrative? Because I think, you know, what I've heard from people over the years, and more like they were never married, but they were just going through a child custody situation, is, oh my God, I'd be terrified if they accused me of molesting our child and I didn't do it. Or, you know, substance abuse. And I don't, you know, but like all it took was him getting her friend to testify and say, oh yeah, you know, I mean, how is that rare? Or does that happen more often than we think, that people accuse people of sexual misconduct, of addiction? And what can you do about it if you know that that's not who you are?
Well, is it rare? I mean, people are capable of anything, right? Especially when they're mad. Um, you know, what could I say about this? I have had cases where my client was falsely accused of sexual molestation, and that was never proven. Child Protective Services didn't open up an investigation at all. But, you know, that was a problem for him. But luckily the court didn't put a lot of weight on what about the sexual molestation, but yes, that does happen. It does happen. With respect to relapsing, I mean, I guess I've seen people bring friends and their sponsors in from AA to say that they attend these meetings, they've gone through the steps. It's really important, if you know your sobriety is in question, that you know the date that you became sober, because that's the first question that you say in AA when you introduce yourself. Because I've been to meetings, and the judges will want to hear that you have gone through the 12 steps. That's really important to them. And I know some people don't like AA, but or NA, but that's a good way to demonstrate that you are sober, is by essentially, unfortunately, parading everybody that you go to these meetings with into court to testify that that's simply not true.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I often
a
wonder
lot.
if I had just, because, the way that it happened with me is, without rehashing all of it, was my attorney advised me that, between his accusation and then my best friend backing him up, that, she had the same concerns about me. She was like, if they file an emergency motion, you're going to lose. And this was like right at the beginning of COVID too. And she's like, I don't know when we'll ever get back in front of a judge again. You're just going to be cut off. But what if we hire a best interest attorney to represent the girls? And instead of going before a judge, we put this all to this woman and give her the power to decide, which is what we did. Which, when I told the story to Sarah, she was like, but wait a minute, he's paying this best interest attorney and this person has all the power. Like, it seems kind of insane in hindsight. But at the time, it's so terrifying when, like, you hear a judge is going to decide to take your kids away. It's just, court is so intimidating that I don't know. I just thought anything would be better than that. But in hindsight, I could have had my sponsor come in and speak to the judge. I could have, been taking drug tests and turn those in. There's so many things I could have done, but at the time it was too scary to go to court, I guess. My question to you would be, if you had a client that, I can't even imagine a similar situation because mine was so like out there, but are there times where you would tell them, let's take our chance with a judge instead of just agreeing to something with the ex?
You mean in terms of substance abuse being at issue?
Yeah, something similar to mine. I guess that's a really vague question, but what would you tell a client who is afraid to go to court, and is just like it's, I don't know, like, I can't quite get the question right. I don't know.
I
Maybe
get what you're saying. It is, to those of us who aren't in court every day, like to you, Dana, the court system and like fighting the government or fighting somebody else is like, no, you've been doing it for years and years. So you know the ins and outs, and like, but to us who don't, I'm with you. I feel exactly what you're saying, Natasha. It would be if an attorney was saying, well, I don't know, we could go to court and today the judge could decide you're not going to see your girls. And now we're entering COVID. You know what I'm saying? I can see how you took like, okay, fine. He'll pay for the special interest attorney, even though he's paying. So he has direct access to her all the time. It's hard. I mean, that's where I guess trusting your attorney, boy, you have to have a good advocate for you in your court,
so
right?
I guess what I would say is that I've never seen a judge completely take away custody from a parent because of an allegation of substance abuse or alcohol abuse. Instead, what they do is they still allow, in my experience, the parent to see the child, but under certain conditions. In my very first trial that I had 10 years ago, the judge ordered my client, who had her third DUI while the custody trial was pending, he said, you can have custody, but you have to wear an alcohol monitoring bracelet, which at the time she asked me, what is that? And I said, Lindsay Lohan has one, because Lindsay Lohan was getting in trouble at that time, during that time. But so that's an extreme example. I've never seen that happen again, although anything's possible, I guess. But he had her wear one, and he said you can have custody just so long as you wear this and abstain from alcohol and go to AA and stuff like that. So I could see a judge putting a condition on maybe a parent with substance abuse having having facing the allegation of relapsing. But the condition could be, like you said, drug testing, like they use LabCorp a lot, and just being able to provide, clean urinalysis. And then with alcoholics, it's usually a breath test before they have access with the children. But that's usually what I've seen, because I'm sorry that it was represented to you that you would not see your children.
Yeah.
That's more what I've seen, that they put conditions on the parent with the alleged abuse, in order to see their children. They have certain conditions that they have to meet.
Yeah, I wish, in hindsight, I wish I would have just gone to court and put it all out there for a judge.
Okay, Dana Whitten, you have been so good with your time. I know Natasha and I totally appreciate it. So fascinating. Look, you're amazing. You're our new sponsor of this podcast adventure that Natasha and I are on. So thank you. It's dwhittenlaw.com is your website. You're offering, really, I mean, people should contact you if they're thinking about getting divorced, if they have divorce questions. We didn't even get to all of them today, but we'll have you on again. You're offering this 60-minute consultation for $150. You can mention Natasha, you can mention Sarah Fraser show.
Such a good deal. Like, that is such a good deal.
Oh my God, come prepared with your questions. Dana, what's your phone number that people can reach out for more?
God, you were going to ask me that.
Well, it's dwhittenlaw.com for sure. Just go to our website. But yes, also phone number.
301-637-6070. And I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you, Dana. Thanks for being on.
Yes, and thank you for supporting us. It's such good advice, and it's so nice when women support other women. And going through divorce is not fun for anybody. Nobody really wins. But having, a supportive lawyer that you can put your trust in, worth its weight in gold, makes the whole experience, makes or breaks it. So invest in it, ladies. Protect yourself.
Protect yourself. Thanks, Dana. Bye.
Thank you, guys.